is Terry Bradshaw, quarterback, Pittsburgh Steelers.
Pitch by Downing, swinging. There's a drive into left center field. That ball has got to be out of here. It's gone. It's 7:15. There's a new home run champion of all time. And it's
ABC's Monday Night Baseball, live from Fenway Park in Boston, Massachusetts.
He is fading, looking. He's under the gun. He's tied. He throws. It is.
This is baseball, Major League Baseball. And this is Mel Allen.
Touchdown! Oh, my! The thrill of victory. And the agony of defeat.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Past Our Prime podcast. My name is Scott Johnston. That is
Bill Mahoney.
And that is...
I thought you were Bill Hoffman.
Bill Mahoney Hoffman, sorry.
Okay, I'm Mark Hoffman Mahoney.
Nice. Now that we got that straightened out, boy, we're going to ride that one, aren't we?
That joke
never let you forget that.
Man. That joke's never going to die.
We are looking back this week at the February 18th, 1974 issue of SI, John Havlicek and the Celtics on the cover. But real quickly, wanted to just say, what this podcast is about, what we do here, and growing up on box scores, the game of the week, and Sports Illustrated. Bill, Mark, and I, three longtime sports TV producers. We reflect back on the world of sports through the lens of old issues of SI from 50 years ago. Larry Zonka and the Dolphins, Reggie Jackson and the Swingin' A's, the Wizard of Westwood, the Golden Bear, Muhammad Ali, just a few of the many heroes that we'll showcase weekly here on the Past Our Prime podcast. So stay up to date on what happened in the past as we go back in time and return to the glory days of sports week by week, issue by issue of Sports Illustrated. We started this back January 7th, 1974, and here we are now 6 weeks later, middle of winter 1974. So with that, let's get right to this week's issue, and we will start with Mark. What you got?
I like the scorecard. There's a bunch of things here. One was Morehead State's head coach decided he had a more important game down the road, so he sat his 6 top players, and they made a 400-mile trip to go play Illinois State without their top 6 players, and they were the better team, but without them, they lost by 39 points, and the Illinois State athletic director was so upset. He said, "This is a hoax on our team, our coaching staff, our fans. That man should not be coaching," and I told him so.
The funny thing is they lost by 41 points to Illinois State. Basically, what this coach did is called load management. That's exactly what he did. He didn't want his players playing 2 non-conference games and having to do a 800 round-trip bus trip, so he had them stay home. And
that's what Popovich did.
That's what all the coaches did until the NBA said, can't do that anymore.
Though Popovich he might have sat as top 3 players, but never a top 6 players. I mean, then you're dealing with a G League team there.
Right. Billy?
I think I have one, so I can get back to it. I think there was one where the ABA, it said ABA players boycotted a luncheon because gifts weren't placed in their room. And I thought, boy, you're going to boycott just something. And it was for the fans as well. Like, fans went, tickets were $10, and the players said no because there were no gifts. And I thought, even then, there were people out there, athletes, that said, yeah, I don't get what I want. You're not getting what you want.
Yeah. They've kind of perfected that these days.
Yes, they have. Yes, they have.
You got another, Mark?
Yeah, I love Stan Musial there, the quote from him. And he was talking about how much he enjoys being with baseball and the Cardinals. And he says, I have a darn good job with the Cardinals, but please don't ask me what I do. He's an ambassador for the game.
Yes, exactly. Stan the man.
He wouldn't have to do anything.
Right.
That you could ask me. He goes, yes, exactly. I'm Stan Musial. I do what I want.
I think he was a spy, and that's his cover job. because remember there's an old TV show called I Spy, and the guy was a tennis player. That was his cover.
Right.
He was actually, a spy and stuff. And I firmly believe that's with Greg Popovich, because Popovich, has this Air Force background, his intelligence background, and he's making these trips to Europe to, quote, scout international players. My theory has always been that Popovich is actually a spy for the United States.
Yeah. Go with that.
I will.
Yeah. That gets us to our cover story, which is John Havlicek of the Celtics on the cover. And the article says the sledding was tough. It's the middle of winter. The Celtics started that season 29-6, and they have a 4-game set. And this is when you know that the Celtics were just a great, great team, because in that week they go 2-2. They lose on a 25-footer by Bob Weiss at the buzzer. The Bulls beat them. Then they fly to Milwaukee. They actually beat the Bucks and Abdul-Jabbar 105-104. Come home, get blown out by the Knicks, and then go back and play the Bucks again. This time Kareem gets 28-21, beats them 95-86. But a 2-2 week just shows you how dominant of a team they were.
Well, yeah, they said that they were 29-6 in the 1973 portion of the season, and then they started 74 8-7. So people are complaining. That means the team's 37-13. How many teams would love to be 37-13?
Right. But they're coming off a 68-14 season the year prior, and everyone's thinking, oh, we're hanging a banner, and they lose in the playoffs. So everyone was kind of like going, oh, here we go again. But it just goes to show you that they didn't have enough faith, because they would get to the NBA Finals, winning in 7 games, with Havlicek being the series MVP.
Over Kareem and the Milwaukee Bucks.
Yeah, right.
But it just shows you how spoiled they were, because it just said they got off to a rough start at the beginning of the new year. They were 39-15. Many teams would like to have a rough year starting off 39-15. They were just a great team.
If you want to know what that team was like, and Havlicek and Cowens, then there is just one man to talk with, and that is legendary Globe writer Bob Ryan, author of just too many books to mention all of them, if we're being honest. Here's 3 of what I think are 14, but he may have written another one in the last half hour or something like that. So he wrote Hondo, Celtic Man in Motion, co-authored that with John Havlicek. Cousy on the Celtic Mystique, co-authored with Bob Cousy. And Drive, the story of my life, written with Larry Bird. Is there a Celtic that didn't write a book, is my first question. Bill Simmons calls him the greatest basketball writer ever. I don't know if he is the greatest, but I don't know anyone who is better. Bob, thanks for joining us on the Past Our Prime podcast.
Well, I appreciate that very much. And there was one other Celtic-oriented book called Celtic Pride, which I wrote in 1974 after they won that first post-Russell championship, talking about the whole rebuilding of the team after Russell and Sam Jones had left. So that was my first actual book specifically on the Celtics.
And that is a perfect segue for what we're about to talk about. So chapter and verse, I expect some quotes. But let's start with that team and Havlicek in particular, because I was 5 years old when this issue of Sports Illustrated came out. So I don't think I ever saw Hondo play. What kind of player was he? And is there anyone now that is somewhat similar to what he did? How good was he?
Yeah, well, how good he was is that for a period of time from roughly 1969 until 73 or 4, he was the best player in the league, below center. That's when the world was very different, and there were big pivot men ruled the world. It was a 20-year period when only one non-center won the MVP. He never did win an MVP, nor did Jerry West, by the way, nor did Elgin Baylor. And that's all because it was dominated by centers in that period of time. But if you're talking about all-around player, offense, defense, all facets of offense and defense, he was the best player in the league. At that point, both Oscar and Jerry were declining. And they were still great, but they had peaked, and John was at his peak. First of all, he's fainted with damned with faint praise to refer to him as a great 6 man only, because yes, he was the best classic sixth man in NBA history when he was a sixth man, which was a luxury only the Celtics or a team at that level could afford. Okay. And we bring him off the bench. Fact of the matter is that starting with his second year with the team in 1963-64, he was second on the team in minutes played after Russell. He was finishing games. Red was a believer in that. So it was a luxury Red could afford. And then when Russell retired, Heinsohn, of course, had no option but to start him. And he became a starter and led the league in minutes played 3 times at least. Okay. So, I mean, his endurance was legendary, truly legendary. He didn't get tired. While the other team was resting their star in the second quarter, John was playing his game, and John was averaging over 40 minutes a game for a number of years in a row. He also broadened his game. When he first came into the league as a rookie, he was a defensive-oriented player who ran up and down the floor, and as he would tell you, catch passes from Kuzi and make layups. And he was a fair shooter. He went home and worked on his shot that summer of 63 and came back and averaged 19 points a game the second year, starting to make a lot more jump shots. And he became a very efficient shooter. He was a great all-around scorer, great to the basket, great finisher. And then the next thing he did was work on his ball handling and his playmaking ability. And he casually took over being a surrogate point guard as time went on. He was always a great defensive player. He's noted for moving without the ball. That's his famous thing. And he ran more miles than anybody. But he was also good as he made himself, as all great players do. They get better because they work on their deficiencies. And John worked on his. So by about his 5th or 6th year, he had mastered this game.
I'm so glad that you mentioned.
So there's a capsule summary of what John Havlicek was
and I was going to say, I'm so glad you mentioned the sixth man, because I find that to be such a misnomer. Because who the heck cares who starts the game? What matters is who are the 5 guys that finish the games. And so, because Kurt Rambis started for the Lakers, and but he didn't finish most of those games.
Yeah. No, there was a six man. The Celtics had the first great six man was Frank Ramsey, and he mentored John. He was still playing when John was a rookie, and this is funny how the game has changed in so many ways. But John said one of the tips that he gave him was don't sit in your warm up jacket, have it around your shoulders, so when they tell you to go in, you can get in the game faster. Things like that. But he also tutored him in other things. But he learned how to and adopted the mentality of it from Frank Ramsey. And he became renowned for his being a sixth man, and that's fine. But I just don't want people to think of him only in those terms, because then you would have a hard time convincing them that he was actually as good as or even better at the time than Oscar Robertson or Jerry West, who were the 2 supreme players of that size.
Right.
So the team of their glory years wins all these titles, the last one in 69, and then Russell retires in that group. The 5 years between titles, did that seem like a lifetime to Boston fans because they were so used to success?
Oh, they were spoiled, I guess, to a degree. But the thing is, they had immediate. There was one bridge year, the first year after Russell and Sam. They were 34-48. Tom Heinsohn was a rookie coach. It was OJT from day one. He had never coached anything in his life, not a youth league, nothing. Red made him the coach because he was a bright guy and all that. A very smart basketball man, but he had never coached. He was learning his job as well. And he was coaching some guys he had been teammates with. And that's always very tricky when you have to start giving orders, including Havlicek, who had been a roommate and at one point. But he's coaching guys that he played with, like Satch Sanders and Larry Siegfried. And things didn't always go great with some of those guys. Particularly Siggy was a little headstrong. But anyway, but little remembered by that year is that that's the year of the Knicks, 69-70, the great Knicks team that I think is the most single important team in the history of the league in terms of focusing public attention on the NBA, more than the Celtics were able to do because it was in New York. Anyway, they won the season series. They beat the Knicks that year 4-3. People don't realize that. It was just a nice little, little feather in their cap. Then they have a fateful draft day in 1970. They're finished. They're picking fourth, and Red picks Dave Cowens out of Florida State. Not a lot of people were aware of Dave Cowens because Florida State never played a tournament game in his time. They never made the tournament, and people weren't really paying great attention to Florida State. They had yet to join the ACC. They weren't on the forefront of people's minds of basketball. And so he had to show the world who he was. But Cowens was the central transformative figure that helped tie this, set the tone for what was going to happen in the next several years with this team. They go and they win 44 games that year. They don't make the playoffs, but they did have a 10-game winning streak at one point in December that got people's attention. 77, 172. They make the playoffs for the first time post Russell, but and they lose to the Knicks. And then the big trade was made that turned everything around, and that was Paul Silas. He was the missing link, and they needed a guy. He was the anti-DeBusschere. Dave DeBusschere was the guy that was tormenting them, not Frazier, not Reed. I mean, they were great players, but DeBusschere was the guy they couldn't handle. Well, Silas turned out to be the DeBusschere kryptonite, and that tied the team together. And the next year they win 68 games. And they lose in the playoffs because Havlicek got hurt in Game 2, missed all of Game 3, and played with a left hand only in Games 5 and 6, and pretty much all exclusively left-handed. And they finally lose in Game 7 at home to the Knicks. But so now they're ready for the next year. They do go on and they win the championship. We're going to have the 50th anniversary of a really memorable finals against the Bucks, in which there were 5 road victories, including the last 4 of that series. You seldom see a series like that.
We're getting quickly why Bill Simmons referred to you as the greatest basketball writer ever, because you talk about this stuff like it happened last week. It's very, very impressive. Mark mentioned briefly, but I was in Boston for the last 17 years, just recently moved back home. In that time, the Red Sox won 4 championships, of course, the Patriots and their run. So Boston does have this kind of sense of win or else. But really, as Mark mentioned, that started back with the Celtics, didn't it? These playoff teams, I'm sure, were well received, but it was all about winning and hanging banners.
It wasn't to the extent that it is today, because this predates talk radio and talking heads on TV and the manufacturing of issues so you can have airtime and justify your presence. And that world that I started out in 1969 didn't exist then. You just took things at face value, and you didn't manufacture issues. You didn't manufacture stuff. So that kind of dialogue, it was not existing then. No, that's a product of WFAN coming in the year in '79, and television talk shows started, pioneered by the sports writers on TV in Chicago. If you remember them, the smoke-filled room. They were the great grandfather of all the TV talk shows that exist today, including PTI and Around the Horn and anything on Fox and CBS and anywhere else. No, the people were okay with the world as it was. Now they get riled up artificially by the TV and radio talent.
That's a great perspective.
Is Boston, though, the best sports town in America? And I know people in LA will take offense, but the reason I mention it is there's a uniqueness to Boston. There is no baseball stadium like Fenway Park. There is no basketball stadium that has parquet floor like the Celtics have. It's a uniqueness the city has in addition to its champions.
The topic is eternal. It was really first broached by Frank DeFord in Sports Illustrated a number of 35 years ago, maybe, about the best sports town and the hub and all that. I'm an outsider. I grew up in New Jersey. I went to school at Boston College, and I'm still in Boston as a result. I've never left. But so I have a perspective of an outsider. Like my daughter has the DNA. I don't have that of the Boston sports fan. It is a conceit that has been fed to the Boston sports fans that they are the greatest, that this is the greatest sports town. I don't think there's such a thing. I don't think anybody can lay claim to being the best sports town. We're the luckiest sports town in the 21st century because of the championships, which we have nothing to do with naturally. The players have to play, and we are very fortunate. We can talk about that. But our big hole in the sports soul is college. I don't think you can lay claim to being the best sports town if you're exclusively pro or exclusively college. And we don't have the collegiate, the college sports passion that other areas have had. I'll say that. I wish we did, because I love college basketball particularly. Although we can have a whole other discussion about the hell in the handbasket ruin of college sports right now with the NIL and the portal and all the stuff that's going on. It'll never be the same again.
No.
But it's a vibrant sports town, and for sure. but it does have a big hole in the sports soul and in college.
Yeah, Matty Ryan and the BC Eagles were number one, I believe, for a blip. And
they were.
That's what it was, a blip, because nobody covered it.
Well, the only time it's been different in my experience was the Flutie era. And we're 40 years removed now from the Hail Mary pass of Gerald Phelan and now it's in 1984. But the Flutie era, the town was alive with college sports. They sold out the old Foxborough Stadium for games, believe it or not, 60,000 at times. They were able to transfer their games out of the heights of BC. Well, actually the only other time I were a college sports fan, the late 40s, when Harry Aganis was at Boston University. So we've had these two blips on the radar screen, but that's it. It's not lasting. If the number one college sport in this town is hockey. And right now, I don't know if you know this, but you probably do. Last weekend, BC and BU were number one and number two, and had a weekend home and home, which BC won. And then BU turned the tables on them at the Beanpot last Monday night and beat them in the first round of the Beanpot. But this has always been a good college hockey town for those who love hockey.
Let me ask. I got to take you back, because this to me is a childhood dream. You graduate college, and then the next year you're the Celtics beat reporter. How did you? How was that for you? What was that feeling like?
It was, well, the fact that's it sounds like a made up story, but it's a gospel truth. I watched the 1969 finals in the stands, not for a couple of freebie tickets that the Globe had. Okay. Here's the chronology. I graduated in 68. I got and become a summer intern. I graduated June 3rd, 1968. And on June 10th, I started at the Globe as a summer intern. I had got a chance. I got an offer, interview, and I made it made the cut. I met a guy named Peter Gammons from North Carolina on my very first day in the job. And we became
I've heard of
good
him.
friends. Yeah, you might have.
Baseball guy.
And so we were fellow interns, and we spent a lot of time together in the next several years. I am in the Army Reserves. This is the height of Vietnam. I had gotten into the reserves, and I had to go on my active duty, and I went from October of 68 until February of 69 at Fort Knox. And when I came out, they rehired me back as an office boy with a verbal promise of the next opening on the staff whenever that would come. This was in June of 68. And it came in October. Okay. So I'm sitting and minding my own business in the office one day in October on a Wednesday, I believe it was. And the boss comes down and says, I got good news for you. This and that's happened. You're going to be on the staff. And oh, by the way, you're covering the Celtics Friday night. Bob Sales had covered the Celtics for like 5 or 6 years. And he had left. The reason I got the opening was he left sports to go to news and created a vacancy. And they gave me that vacancy. But he had been the Celtic beat guy. And they had no heir apparent. They just didn't. They had no heir apparent. They said, well, the kid likes basketball. We'll give him a shot, kind of thing. And actually, Peter Gammons and I split the first 6 home games. We weren't even traveling yet in those days, and routinely. But I got the beat after it settled in after about a month. And I was a 23-year-old beat man. And my orientation had been college. I mean, I followed the NBA to a degree, and I went to, but I was not passionate about the NBA, and I didn't know about the nuances of NBA basketball, which I had to learn from, and I had mentors, and the mentors were named Havlicek and Sanders and Nelson, and also Heinsohn, and they took me in. They all did. They and gave me, of course, it was to their advantage to have the representative of the most important media outlet in New England on, covering them, and that was the Boston Globe. But I mean, it was surreal. I mean, I was 6 months removed. On May 5th, May of 1969, I'm in the stands, and on October of 69, I'm covering opening night.
Bob,
I mean, that's fictional.
And did you go for dinner with the team? You would
Oh yeah, that's what you did. I went to dinner, lunch, closed bars for years with them. I mean, that's what you did. And I'd go up to them after a game on the road. All right, where are we going? And because there's always somewhere they were going to go. Yeah. And and we would go and close the joint up very often. Sure.
Bob, you're 23. How are you not intimidated by them at this stage of your life?
Because they didn't try to intimidate me. I think about it. I was the same age as the young guys, and not that much younger than the middle guys. The middle guys being Havlicek and Nelly, who were then they would have been 27, okay, and 28, 29, and I'm 23. But I was the same age as Steve Kaburski and Don Chaney and JoJo White and Cowens. I'm a year older. I'm 2 years older than Cowens. And when he came, I adopted him. I mean, he's the most fascinating figure I've ever covered, and really he was. And socially, it was easy. It was no problem at all. And the tribute to them,
Yeah.
But I was enthusiastic. I wanted to learn stuff, and I brought something to the table. I did my homework. I knew who they were. I knew where they went to high school. I knew that kind of stuff, and I got to know their wives' names, the kids' names, what car they drove. I was part of the package.
I was just going to ask you, I know you had a personal relationship with a lot of these players, and guys like Havlicek, he's obviously one of the top Celtics of all time. You knew him personally. What kind of person was John Havlicek for people that may have never seen him play?
Organized. He was organized in everything he did. He was precise, meticulous, a neat freak. His locker was hilarious. His locker, he used to wear, if you were wearing like we call executive socks, really relatively high knee socks, he would hang them over a hanger in the locker room. And he had these cologne bottles and stuff and, shaving cream and all that. And he arranged them in ascending order of height. His locker room looked like the general was coming for inspection. And I remember one night I was eating with him and we had steak and I ate a little of the fat. And he looked at me and said, "You'd eat that?" I mean, the world was logical. Everything seemed logical. It was like basketball. He understood it, and what seemed logical and predictable to him wasn't always that evident to the younger players. It took him a while to get accommodated with the young guys on that team on the court, because he saw things that they didn't see and saw them quicker. But John was, but he was very gracious. And I always say this. He was as gracious to the high school kid coming in with a tape recorder to interview him as he was to a nationally syndicated columnist. If Jim Murray showed up or Milton Gross or somebody, he was unfailingly polite. He's a gentleman, off the court. And I got the longer he was around, the less inhibited in the sense he was. By the time he retired, he was one of a fun person to be around. I wouldn't have said that in the beginning. He was a nice person to be around, but he actually became fun. And so I'm very fond of John. And of course, I was privileged to do the one and only book about John with Hondo, and so that was important to me. That was my first As Told To book. Yeah.
It sounds like the way you mentioned he in the off season would improve on what he saw was a weakness, and then the way you mentioned his locker, would he be described as a perfectionist?
Oh yeah, I would think so. Yeah, that's actually yes, and he was smart enough about himself to know he didn't want to coach, and I think the reason he didn't want to coach was that he knew he would be impatient with anybody that didn't get it, or anybody that had a slovenly work habit. I think he would not have enjoyed it, and would not have been able to reconcile himself to that. And he knows that they're going to be out there, and every team's going to have somebody. And so he never coached, although obviously intellectually he would have been a tremendous coach. But he knew that about himself. He understood himself very well.
That's why West didn't coach or didn't like coaching.
Yeah,
for the same
West.
kind of
West was right. He was. Oh, I could. You want a West story? I gave a West story.
Yeah.
So I'm in LA. I don't know what the purpose was at this particular point in time when he was coaching, and he's coaching, and Lou Hudson's on the team. And of course, he had been a great player, but it was over for Lou Hudson by the time he got to LA. And Wes says to me, we're in the forum, he says to me, Lou Hudson, he said, if it were a horse, I'd have to take him out and shoot him. So that was Jerry West as a coach. John didn't want to get to that stage.
Oh, God.
So it wasn't quite the motivational speaker
That's right.
that they have coaches these days. You were legendary for going after the coaches. You were not easy. Despite being friends with a lot of these guys, you wrote it the way you saw it. What was your relationship, and how did it evolve with Tommy Heinsohn?
Well, it devolved. It started out great. As I told you in the beginning, we used to have coffee on the road and together, and talk about stuff and everything, and it was going great, and he'd tell me good stories about the old days and the whole thing, and it was great. But as time went on, I was also, hanging out with the players all the time. And the first issue was JoJo White. And the veterans were a little bit disenchanted at a certain point in time with JoJo, who they felt was not working hard enough on defense and didn't box out. That drove them crazy. And when they switched and he got caught with a big guy maybe on the boards, he wouldn't box out. Whereas Hambone Williams, they said, was a tiger. He would box out. Okay. Well, I forget exactly what the specific was, but there was a thing with JoJo came up, and I basically reflected and print the opinion of the players without naming names over what Heinsohn was saying. Tommy didn't like it. And it started, him a little bit and going off, and to the point where not once, but at least twice and maybe three times, he told the team at various gatherings not to talk to me. And after one of those sessions, which because they told me about it, and one of those sessions, and we laughed at him, not on his face, but behind his back. And he said, "He's not your friend," blah, 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 And one time, one of the players came to me basically with the minutes of the meeting about 10 minutes after it was over to say, "He did it again. Told you, he told us not to talk to you." So we went up, and last couple of years weren't really good between he and me, myself. And the last year in 75, 76, we get to the finals and things aren't going well at all. And after game one, I wrote he was fuming about something, and I wrote a column in which I said that he was like a spoiled brat whose father took away the car keys. And he didn't like that line, And
he didn't?
That's so much.
No,
I don't understand why.
It's a good line.
Well, so basically like I'm covering for the Boston Globe, but he's not talking to me, but he's not talking to me. I mean, he's not talking to me in this sense. In a group he had to,
right,
but not one-on-one. So anyway, when we got to Phoenix for game 3 and 4, I stayed at Paul Westfall's house. A story people don't believe, but it's true. But instead of the hotel, Westfall had become a very good friend, and when he was with the with the Celtics, I stayed at his house, and the two times of the Phoenix trips, games 3 and 4 and 6, rather than at the hotel. So now they go on, they win the championship, and they're in the locker room getting the champagne poured around in game 6. And I went up to him and I said, "Congratulations," and shook his hand, and he shook my hand, and that was that. Now I get off the beat. Another story. I get off the beat. And 2 years later, so I'm not around him for 2 years. 2 years later, there's a testimonial for his old college his Celtic roommate, Jim Luskatov. And I'm at the thing too. And I go up to him at the bar. I say, "Tommy, would it spoil your evening if I say hello?" "No, that's okay." And that was in 1976 until the day he died, which was only 2 years ago. We were friendly. Yeah. And he did interviews for me. It was over, like it never happened. We never talked about it. We just went on. I'd go in the press room, cover a game. "Hey, Bobby." And he was he always called me Bobby. A couple of people. He's my mother, and he called me Bobby. And we got along fine. It was like it never happened. But it was painful. One of the reasons I got off the beat was I just couldn't see having a year of conflict with him. It wasn't going to serve anybody well. It wasn't going to serve the readers well. I didn't want the stress, and he didn't need the aggravation. So I got out of the way.
What that 73-74 team, where do you rank that on the hierarchy of Boston championship teams?
Well, we know they were better the year before, when they won the 68. And actually that team, they had a great start. As I recall, they were 30 wins, 7 losses. They were cruising. And then they went into cruise gear the second half of the year. They kind of coasted home. So when they entered the playoffs, there was a bit of uncertainty in 74. And then they have a great opening series with Buffalo, who were a terrific rival for a 3-year period there. And
McAdoo?
And Ernie D.
Yeah.
And Randy Smith.
Yep.
That was Ernie D's great rookie year. Before he got hurt, he led the league in assist free throw shooting. And Ernie D was the closest thing to Cousy that ever that Celtics ever had. Anyway, it was only for one. When he got to the Celtics later on. Anyway, the team. They weren't prohibitive favorites or anything. Milwaukee was the prohibitive favorite, but they had bad luck. Lucius Allen slipped on a warm-up jacket, laid mistakenly on the sideline in the Seattle series, tore his knee up, and he was out for the rest of the playoffs. Now, he was the starting guard next to Oscar. In game 1 of the finals, John McLaughlin got hurt. So now they're down 2 guards, and Mickey Davis, who is a forward, and of no great renown, has to become the starting guard. But Oscar was 34, and he was starting to go. He didn't have the stamina he once had. Kareem carried them. Mm-hmm. He averaged, I got the numbers on him today. He averaged like 35 and 13 for the whole series. He carried them completely. There's no way the thing goes more than 5 if Kareem doesn't play out of his mind. He was so good. But so I forgot the question. Oh yeah. Right. So yeah, the Milwaukee they were the favorites, and yet even without those 2 guys, they were able to go 7 games in a very odd series in which there were 5 road victories, including the last 4 games were each won by the road team. How about that?
Yeah. Cowens really, even though Kareem was Kareem, but Cowens really made him work, didn't he?
Yes, he did. And Kareem respected Dave because Dave was rough but not dirty. He always got stuck guarding him, giving up 6 inches until game 7. And there was a famous conclave after game 6, which the Celtics lose at home in that spectacular double overtime when Kareem makes the hook shot to win the game from the corner, one of the most famous single shots in the history of the NBA. And apparently Kuzi and was brainstorming with Heinsohn and John Killalay, the assistant coach, and they decided for the first time in their relationship covering, playing against Kareem, they're going to double team. They're going to swim him. They're not going to let Cowens. They're going to make Curtis Perry or Cornell Warner beat him. In other words, not Kareem. And in the middle of that game, which Cowens started off hot and had a great first half, there was like a 17 or 18-minute period when Kareem went scoreless in the middle of the game, in the middle of the second, the middle of the third, during which time the Celtics built up a 17-point lead, which they really held on to and win the game. So full props to Kareem for making that a really competitive, wonderful series.
Bob, in all your times with the Celtics, do you have a specific one that is your favorite team and why?
Oh, we haven't mentioned, Larry.
Exactly. That's where I'm going.
Larry's too young for this podcast.
Yeah.
If there's a Bob Ryan out there, with my enthusiasm and historical, equivalence and all that, who I would wish on them something good, it would be to have a chance to cover the 1985-86 Celtics from January to the rest of the season. They hit their stride in January and played some of the most exquisite basketball that has ever been seen on this planet. And they are the best team of all time in the pre-3-point shot mania era. And boy, would I love to see them against the Warriors at their prime. But to see whose game would prevail, because it's a totally different game of basketball now due to the preponderance of the 3 and lack of inside play. Greatest front court of all time, unarguably. And their great trump card in any all-time discussion is the nature of their 6th man. Bill Walton that year gave them a dimension no team has ever had and never will have, and that is bringing a man off the bench to change the game in that manner. There are another 6 men, Havlicek's leading off with the pack, but nobody changed the game and affected the game coming off the bench the way Bill Walton did. And also in conjunction with that year, in conjunction with Robert Parrish, the greatest 1-2 center punch in the history of the league. Unarguably, nobody can look you in the straight face and give you an alternative. Nobody had a 1-2 center punch in the history of the league like that. That team, when they were playing well, was basketball artistry, period.
Would you agree, though, that L.A. and Boston were the biggest rivals? I mean, New York obviously will have an argument, but just what they went through in the 60s and then with Bird and Magic in the 80s. And I remember Bird and Magic, even when they retired, Magic had a golf tournament once. He didn't play golf. Larry was playing in the tournament. So I talked to Larry, and he goes, you tell Magic to get out on the green, even though they're retired now, and I want to play golf against me. So I go back to Magic and say, hey, Larry wants to challenge you. And he looks at me and he says, to what? To golf. Oh, golf. Yeah, sure. So there's competitive.
The 3 great rivalries in the last 60 years for the Celtics. The Lakers, the 76ers, the Warriors / 76ers, that early 80s with the 76ers, it was a terrific rivalry. And of course, the Knicks from 69 to 74, it was a great rivalry had a special flavor that was special because of all the New York college kids that could come to the games in Boston and make it like a college game. Okay. Bird and Magic, it's no myth. I'm here to tell you guys a little scoop here. There's going to be a Larry Bird Museum in Terre Haute opening late in the spring. And I'm part of helping plan for it by interviewing people. I'm one of the people who are interviewing people for audio tributes that are going to be made to Larry by everybody from teammates to coaches to opponents. And you can guess who's front and center in the opponent thing, right? Mm-hmm. I interviewed him 2 weeks ago, Magic. And he just sparkles talking about Larry and the relationship and how far back they go. And they are personal friends. And they do care about each other, and they are in frequent communication, and it's a really touching thing, frankly. And it's all true. That Laker rivalry. I mean, Magic said he would, when the schedule came out, circle those games. Those games were absolutely special, and Larry will tell you the same thing.
No load management, then they wouldn't be sitting out those games.
Oh my God! What a joke! They can't even conceive of anything like that. I mean, just not even comprehensive. Can't conceive of it.
Yeah. So we do a segment here called 50-50. It's a trivia question I throw out from 50 years ago, 1974. You get a 50-50 chance to get it, and this one is going to be easy because it's a very subjective answer. There is really no right or wrong answer. So 50 years ago, a movie comes out called The Conversation, one of the most underrated movies, starring Gene Hackman. The second lead in that movie is an actor named John Cassell. Is he the greatest actor to ever come out of Boston, with due respects to Matt Damon and Ben Affleck and those people?
I'm trying to think because there's this one of the old timers, at least one of the old timers, has come. I'm trying to think it's from Boston. I can't contradict it, and I think there's got to be somebody very obvious that I'm forgetting. Boston itself. I'm trying to think.
There's no wrong answer. There's no wrong answer.
I can't believe that.
Yeah. All right. Well, the reason I only throw it out is because it's kind of like he's almost like the Michael Jordan. He made only 5 films, and all 5 films either won the Oscar or was nominated for Best Oscar.
Wow.
Which is he was Dog Day Afternoon, right?
Dog Day Afternoon, both Godfather.
That's what I most associate him with.
Both Godfather films, The Conversation, and The Deer Hunter. Those were the 5 films he made. Every one of them.
I didn't see. I'm well aware of Conversation and Deer Hunter, but I hate to tell you, I didn't see either one. But I do remember Dog Day Afternoon, and absolutely. Okay, so I'll say I still can't believe it because I think there's somebody that I'm forgetting is very obvious, and I don't know. I can't tell you. So
I can't think of one.
Well,
yeah. I'm going with your answer is yes, and that's the right answer.
You win. Well, and Bob, here's an easy one. My father grew up in Boston, lived and died the Celtics. I grew up in California, started to like the Lakers, and he would get on me every time I watched the Lakers and would say one name was the greatest player ever, and you know him, Bob Cousy.
Oh, of course.
What was Cousy like for my dad that's in heaven somewhere?
Well, first of all, Kuz, is still the godfather of all point guards. He's point guard play, it's that begins here, like Art Tatum, piano begins here. Okay. I got to know him. I was 18. I was a freshman at BC. I am the student broadcaster for the radio station for the BC basketball games. So I get to interact routinely with Bob Cousy as a result. And we're friends to this day. He's 94, lives in Worcester, Mass. He's 100% good. And he's in a wheelchair mostly, but he's 100%. I'll take that trade-off any day. 94. Sign me up right now. And just a fun. Oh, he's a sly sense of humor. Honorable guy. He's just and very opinionated about certain things. And politically, he was a very staunch civil rights guy, supporter of his teammates, and back in those days in the 60s, he's just a wonderful man, and I'm privileged to know him, and I'm thrilled to be able to say that I know him. Yeah, I talk about what can I say? Yeah, and but I'm just very happy to know him, and he's doing fine.
Good.
And you can. So look, I don't know what else I can tell you.
No, that's good.
No, but
that's
it's
good.
It's funny because young people today will see old videos
Yes.
of Kuzi and they'll see the set shot and they'll go, "What the heck is that?" Because
Yeah,
he's not jumping. They don't understand
Yeah.
how the game was played back then.
And didn't J.J.
Well,
Redick
as-
say some things about him?
As
Yeah.
a one-hand set shooter myself, I can relate to it. And it's funny, like one of my great who took the last two-hand set shot in NBA history? That's a question. I think I have an answer.
Oh,
John Casal.
Adrian Smith, Odie Smith,
Oh.
I think maybe the last guy that took a two-hand set shot. Although if you listen to Russell's last game, Red's last game in 1966, Game 7 against the Lakers. Here, they won 95-93, and Sam Jones took one. Johnny Most, I can still hear his call because I have a record for it. Is a foot two-handed set shot from 40 feet. And Sam Jones took one.
Nice. Hey, Bob, you mentioned quickly the 73 or the 74 finals between the Bucks and the Lakers. What a great series that was.
Bucks and Celtics.
In a couple of months that they are on the cover, and we would love to have you back to talk more about that series in particular, because this has been just a slice of heaven for us here out in LA.
I'm already plotting. In fact, I did an interview today on this to commemorate that for the Boston Globe.
Wow.
And it was also socially, it's one of my memorable, fun social events I ever covered too. But it was just something. It really was, and I'd be very happy to participate, because I really have great fond memories of the 74 finals.
Wonderful. Then we'll be in touch. Thank you so much for
Thank
joining
you.
us,
Thank
Bob.
you.
It was
It's an
awesome.
honor.
Great
An
job,
honor.
man. Great job.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks a lot. Enjoy your day.
Thank you.
You know, he mentioned there at the end that Kuzi's 94 and still sharp as a tack, and he hopes he's going to be that way as well. And he showed no evidence there that he's not going to be, because I swear to God, he's like, oh, no, that was the 71 team, third quarter, blah, blah, blah. I mean,
he was remembering calls from Johnny Most from the 60s, like
right?
the exact wording.
Right.
Yeah. We'll have him on when we do the, 70-year
Right.
SIs.
I've seen Bob, I've read Bob.
Yeah.
But just an engaging guy, and you can just feel his passion for basketball, especially back then. You know, I know the game has changed, and he doesn't want to necessarily say it's not as good or whatever. He just says it's changed. But when he talks about those Celtics teams, you can just feel that he felt so lucky to be a part of that.
And he was talking about the Magic Bird rivalry too. And when I said to him that story on the golf course, how competitive they were, and though I didn't finish the thought, that when Magic said, compete against me in what? And I said, golf. And then he was like, oh yeah, he'll compete with me in golf, but not basketball. So he was implying basically like, I can still take him in basketball. So that they're retired and the competitive juices are still there.
Yeah, it reminds me of like Rocky and Apollo Creed.
Exactly.
Ding, ding.
Right?
Yeah.
Ding. You move good for an old man.
Yeah.
Speaking of boxing, that's the next story here on the Past Our Prime podcast. It's called Jose Was Attacked by the Entire Zoo. And it is about a boxer, a middleweight champion at the time named Carlos Monzon, who, once again, another one of those guys that I think I might have remembered the name, but it didn't. I had to go look him up. Let's put it that way. And he's fighting a guy in Paris of all places named Jose Napoles, and he beats him. He's a much bigger guy, and no big deal, right? Well, do you guys know much about this Carlos Monzon guy?
I started reading up.
Didn't he
on it.
become an
It's like-
actor and do some certain? I know he dated a lot of celebrities.
Well, he defended his title 14 times. against
Yeah,
11
he's
different
he's
fighters.
he's thought of as
That's right.
one of the best pound for
But-
pound fighters of all time. He finishes with a record of 87-3 with 9 draws, 59 knockouts. I don't think he was ever knocked down.
The most amazing story to me about Carlos Mazon was, so this fight is happening in 1974, early 74. In 1973, he got shot in the leg by his wife.
Right.
And they did surgery to take the bullet out. And this tough guy, he's back in the ring, defending his title.
Right. Well, he was he didn't leave, unfortunately, the fighting to the ring. He was a serial domestic abuser. And was charged numerous times. His first wife, as Mark just mentioned, actually shot him in 1973. Surprisingly, they would later divorce.
Really?
In 1979, he married a woman by the name of Alicia Munoz. In 1988, while vacationing together, he pushed her off a second-store balcony and killed her. He was found guilty of homicide and given an 11-year prison sentence. And in 1995, while on a weekend furlough, he was in a car crash while returning to jail and was killed instantly. He was 53 years old. So he was a beast in the ring. He was a beast outside the ring, apparently, as well.
Who lives by the sword dies by the sword.
But you saw some of the pictures, and you'd see the women that he was with. They were wearing dark sunglasses that were really big.
Yeah.
Because they were hiding the bruises. Yeah.
More than likely.
Yep.
There was a big article about skiing back then. And the only thing I took from it, because they talked about how the Shah of Iran was there.
Right.
Pierre Trudeau of Canada, the King of Greece. Some guy named Gustavo Taini is the best skier in the world. He's a 3-time winner of the World Cup. He has a big weekend. And all I kept thinking about is, back then, where have all the skiers gone? Like, we don't know the skiers anymore. Like, we used to know Ingemar Stenmark or Phil and Steve Marr, right?
Yeah.
Franz Klammer.
Yep.
But I could not name you.
Well, the female skiers.
The female, right?
Yeah.
Lindsey Vonn.
Yeah.
And right now, the one is Michaela Schifrin, who's won 95 World Cup wins, more than any American ever. But she's not a huge star the way that they were back in the day. They used to be, front and center more than just every 4 years.
Well, remember, they used to have the Wide World of Sports. And that was always something you had skiing.
Kind of stuff,
That's
right?
when you saw skiing, you would know the people from there.
Well,
because
the
they did
agony
that.
of defeat.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
Right.
But about that Gustavo, you said his last name really well. He retired at the age of 29. He says he likes mountains, forests, and animals. He sleeps a lot and never goes to parties. I thought what an interesting, sort of eclectic sort of guy.
Sleeps a lot and doesn't go to parties.
Yes.
That's me.
Now, if you just put the skiing in,
That's
we can
okay.
change you to
That's
Gustavo.
okay when you're old and decrepit.
That's
when
what
you're
I'm
young,
saying.
no.
But he was 20-some years old, and you would figure this is the time. But everyone's got a different thing. He's good at skiing, but hey, man, he likes to sleep.
And they used to call him Sexy. That's the next story up on the docket, and it's about a couple of horses that you may have heard of, Riva Ridge and Secretariat. But the question is, how were they going to be as studs, basically? And it's this long article about these conglomerates that were investing in these two horses, and they were really worried because, their semen count was low and they weren't 100% fertile. And, there's talking back then millions of dollars, but I can only read about so much horse sperm before
All I know is what other show is talking about semen count today,
right?
My golly,
Right?
yeah.
Well, it's just like, with the horses, like you're hoping the pedigree will lead to another champion, but it's just like the son of some all-star athlete isn't necessarily going to be a good athlete, or sometimes they have multiple kids. One kid's a great athlete and the other kid isn't. So, it happens.
Yeah.
But he's still sired. Secretariat sired like, I think 663 foals.
I know, think of that. And all I keep thinking about is I would have been one of the guys that would have, for lack of a better word, pulled out of that
we're not going down that road, are we?
That ability to buy. I'd be like, nope, I don't believe Secretariat's going to do anything. 660 horses later. Yeah. And, a few of them, were big high stakes winners. Riva Ridge, same thing, I think 360 foals, 228 winners. So it's a big business. It was a big business then, big business now. Lee Evans, an interesting story on a track star, the weekly track story here in Sports Illustrated. Two-time gold medalist at the 68 Games. He was an activist. Now, those 68 Games were famous for the Black Power movement when Tommy Smith and John Carlos made that famous
Power
fist,
sign,
you know,
black power.
fist. Lee Evans won, but he didn't do that. He didn't necessarily stand at attention for the national anthem, but he didn't do what they did. And he was vilified for that, called Uncle Tom by some. He bowed his head, but that was about it. Evans said he runs track because I'm too much of an individual to do what others do. So he was like, look, I'm with you in spirit, but I'm going to do what I do. So I thought he was an interesting dude. He, while prepping for the 74 games, his brother Dayton went fishing and drowned. So a lot of tragedy in his life. Ended up dying in 2021 of a stroke at the age of 74 years old.
Yes, very spiritual guy, yoga and that stuff.
But he had a good reason for not wanting to follow Carlos and Smith. He said he didn't want to take away from the winners or the games themselves. I mean, he wanted to. He just felt it wasn't right, and he took a stand. But you're right. He was taken to the woodshed on that.
Yeah. The Divine Right of Queens. Now, I don't know if this was the first time America got to hear this name, but she was only 17 years old. Dorothy Hamill wins the first of 3 straight U.S. skating championships. She won gold at Innsbruck in the Winter Olympics, which was in 76, I think. She retired right after that. But get this, she won her first U.S. Open championship with the help of the judges. She gave what they said was a rather listless performance. And the judges, instead of giving her like 5 3s or 5 4s, they gave her 5 8s and 5 9s. And one said, oh, that's because if we had given her 5 3s and 5 4s and she had still won, we would have set the tone for the Russians and the East Germans when it became an international contest, being like, well, the Americans gave her 5 3s and 5 4s. We'll give her now 5. So basically they were cooking the books to give her higher scores so that when she went and competed internationally, the thought was already, and it just shows you, man, the Olympic skating, it finally came to a peak, you know, with that controversy, 20 years later. But what a racket that was.
I mean, the thing I always remember of Dorothy Hamill is just short and sassy.
Exactly.
Right.
She was America's first sweetheart.
Yep.
Because, in the 76 Olympics. But I just like the fact, I've just got to at least mention this, I guess. Her coach at the time, or one of the ones that helped her win the figure skating championships, was Peggy Fleming's old coach. Peggy Fleming was my first babysitter.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
She used to babysit us when we were kids.
So
what the heck did she do to you?
When you caused trouble, were you on thin ice with her?
I was.
Wow.
Skating on thin ice.
Yeah.
Nice.
Ba-da-da-boom.
He's here all week, folks.
Mark Hoffman Mahoney, anytime.
Finally, Arnold Palmer at the Bob Hope Desert Classic. He had won there 5 times. Now he was, an older guy, but the crowd still, they were there to see Arnie's Army, right, Bill?
There's just something about the article, and I loved Arnold Palmer. I mean, as a golfer and the opportunity to see him. But the one thing that got me, and it doesn't have anything to do with golf, because I'm just saying how society's changed. It said he would go through the crowd and give women a lot of kisses. And I keep thinking nowadays we're in such a different society, because remember that was the same with not Wheel of Fortune. What was one? Richard
Dawson, right?
Yeah, he would do the same thing.
And the soccer coach who just got in trouble because he kissed
right. The Spanish soccer coach, right?
Yeah, because it says, one of the photos has Palmer lip locking with a young lady, and I keep thinking, at the time it seemed normal to me.
Yeah, well, it's a whole different now.
Yeah.
You can't get away. But the thing about Arnold Palmer, to me, not just the golfing legend he was, but he transcended society, because name me one other golfer that has a drink named after him.
Right?
That's right.
He created that
he did.
iced tea lemonade combination.
Yeah.
I to this day still say, I'll have an Arnold Palmer light on the lemonade,
No, he was.
You've kept him in business, Mark.
I sure have.
Mark, I forget you do that.
Yeah.
Hey, let's wrap it up with for the record. Mark, Bill, you got anything on towards the end of the issue?
I love Richard. What's his name? Sandalins, a 30-year-old Edmonton dentist, and he talks about his relationship with his dog. So he had a black lab that won a Canadian championship, and he had turned down an offer of $12,000 for his dog Sam, and he said, a quote, "I could sell my wife for that, but not my dog."
Yeah, she liked that. She really enjoyed that story.
Here comes another one. So I guess he was in the doghouse that night.
That's a rough one, buddy.
Yeah.
No, I like the one with Don Shula and Chris Everett. They lost a charity tennis match, and describing Don Shula, they described him as having all the moves of a dump truck.
Yeah, the picture of him there, he doesn't look really comfortable.
He doesn't.
He doesn't look very comfortable hitting that tennis ball.
No.
ABA, San Diego was in last place, but they won 3 in a row for the week behind Coach Wilt Chamberlain. They would go 37-47 in the Stilts' only season as a coach. Two legends in pro football mentioned or elected to the Hall of Fame this week. Lou Gross and Dick, one of the greatest nicknames ever, Dick Night Train Lane.
That's right.
Who had 14 interceptions as a rookie, 68 for his career, still 4th all-time in NFL history. So there you have it. The February 18th, 1974 issue of Sports Illustrated. Bob Ryan, what a great guest he was. Really happy that he joined us. Next week, we go back to UCLA losing another basketball game and have the cover man on that issue of the February 25th, 1974 issue, Gerald Willett, will be joining us. You may never have heard of Gerald Willett, but let me tell you one thing. You'll never forget him after you hear his interview with us next week. Just an amazing, amazing story. For lack of a better word, left the three of us in here shocked. Mm-hmm. So until then, Bill, Mark, thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is Scott saying thanks for joining us for the Past Our Prime podcast. We'll see you next week.